Okay, guys, now we're going to get into the next panel, which I'm going to actually be moderating. And you won't see me that much, so don't fear if you think I've overdone it already. But this one is about beyond one size fits all, how AI is building a learning experience of one. Hyper-personalization, what does that mean? We have a great panel that is here. They're joining as we speak. We have, they'll introduce themselves, but Gabrielle, who's head of industry, education, and services at TikTok. We have LaMar, who is the former digital transformation officer, chief digital transformation officer at Dartmouth. We have who is a managing director of Asia and Japan at Ardoise. We have Rohit, who is the ex-Wipro and is a board member and CXO advisor in lots of digital transformation initiatives. And Catherine Mattice, incredible expert in a variety of subjects, particularly to civility and organizational change and lots of things, people from all over the world. So thanks, everyone. I think maybe the first thing to do, maybe in the order I've even introduced you, would be maybe Gabrielle start and just do a brief introduction to yourself so people have some context and they can then be able to ask questions in terms of what you're doing.
Yes, thank you, Paul. I am Gabrielle Roseman, head of education and services at TikTok for North America. I really focus on our go-to-market strategy for education advertisers. So that's everyone from K-12 through higher ed, and of course, professional education, which we'll focus on here today, just understanding how our products and solutions are helping to really drive more of the student discovery to enrollment outcomes for our brand advertisers.
Great. Thank you, LaMar.
I'm LaMar Bunts. I've worked at the intersection of institutional transformation, workforce strategy, and learning innovation, including as Chief Transformation Officer at Dartmouth, working for the president, but also advising organizations around AI, professional learning, and enterprise capability building. So what interests me most in this conversation is not just the technology itself, but the gap between AI capability and organizational readiness. So glad to be here.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. François Jaouen. Well, in charge of the learning experience and managing director Japan for Ardoise. I basically spent the last 15 years in learning and development for big French groups, automotive industry, luxury industry, with a strong focus on learning, innovation for learning, and how to actually make learning have an impact on everyone. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, Rohit.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rohit. I've got 31 years of experience in the tech industry, but I still feel young. The first 26 years, I worked in a company called Wipro, a tech services company, where I was their chief digital officer, the CIO, and also head of the AI business. And very excitingly, for the last 5 years, I'm a board member and advisor to multiple companies now, especially in the areas of AI, cybersecurity, and digital transformation. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And Catherine.
Hi there, I'm the outlier. Catherine Mattice here, CEO of Civility Partners. For the last 20 years, I've been working with organizations across the globe on culture and specifically broken culture. And I'm here because lots of people love to say culture starts at the top, and in some ways it does, but culture really exists in our everyday interactions. And so access to learning, ongoing learning and ability to work together is important, obviously. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. So Gabrielle, just to start the conversation maybe with you, TikTok has really fundamentally altered how people consume information. Fast, quick, hyper-personal, engaging. How do you see that being transformed in the digital landscape? I mean, how does an organization get that kind of engagement when some of these programs and courses are much longer? Your rapid touch points, rapid immersion, then taking people down an algorithmic path, let's call it. How does that transform, or how does, and obviously this is a big question for everyone, how do you transform that into a learning experience that builds on top?
Yeah.
One piece after another.
Great question, Paul. And I think some of the criticism there has come from this idea that there is a crisis of attention, right? And what we've seen and what we know is that our users actually spend a movie's worth of time on TikTok every day. And so I think when it comes to longer form content or quality of content, it's really not a crisis of attention. It's more about discernment and taste with respect to the audience and the consumers that are coming on platform. And so the quality and impact of that content really sits with the storytellers, right? The enterprises, the businesses that are looking to build community, to distribute the depth of content that's needed to meet their goals on platform. And so I think the expectation is kind of shifting, right? Where we need to sharpen our ability to speak to the heart of a user's pain quickly. And that's really the best path forward. And I think that's true whether it's one-to-one in terms of creator content or one-to-many in terms of telling better stories, even technical ones, to really have the depth and quality of content that's needed to resonate with an audience that does want to learn quickly and at a much faster pace than what we have become accustomed to.
LaMar, inside of universities, how does that, I mean, you see obviously multi-year programs, et cetera. How do you feel that learning is changing and organizations or universities and other enterprises are changing to address this?
Yeah, I think, traditional credentials won't disappear, but I think the market is demanding faster and more continuous validation of workforce capability alongside degrees. I think that pressure is increasing for institutions to demonstrate the measurable career and skills outcomes. That's the main thing. The labor market is moving faster than most institutional cycles.
Is that, I mean, François, you've had a lot of multicultural experience, whether it's in France or in Asia Pacific and Japan. Do you see this different in Asia than you would see it in Europe, than you would see it in North America?
Yes, to some extent, especially around personalization, because very often one of the worries that we get around learning and learning through AI is how can we personalize the learning to the people, and how do we put in the cultural layer that is needed. In Japan, for example, sending out someone for coaching will feel like a correction, not a reward, whereas in the UAE, we have to take into account how they are working around authority, whereas in France, we would be expecting a more structured learning. So what's important is how AI and how through AI we are taking into account these cultural different layers, and that comes from context and being able to give learning the context coming from the role, the organization is making the whole difference, and that's what's making learning relevant at the end.
It seems like two different things that I can ask now, Catherine, in terms of, the context inside of there are very different dynamics inside of every organization, right? And I'm going to ask Rohit about the technology side of this, but in terms of the people side of this, the context varies widely, right? As, François talks about culturally or, nationally or internationally. How does it differ, on the ground when you're talking to organizations themselves and their leadership?
Well, my concern is that technology, for example, if we have AI coaches that can help us practice talking to our manager, for example, that's a very different experience than actually practicing with another person. And so I get a little worried about how much we're going to be relying on AI because every situation is so different. It's important to be able to practice and get coached from somebody beyond AI. So I hope organizations are thinking about that. But yeah, I mean, we work with manufacturing, a ski resort, hotels, it's all very varied. And so in the end, though, people all require and have the same sorts of needs. We all feel like we need to belong. We all feel like we're valued. So, but to François' point, that culturally that those needs are varied, I guess.
To what extent, Rohit, is it, because a lot of what we've talked about, or what Charlotte was talking about before, was really about agents or about AI technology as not a person, but a technology. And, Catherine's talking about people to people, right? Which obviously can be mediated in some level by technology to put the right person in front of the right other person. But to what extent do you think this is really moving towards purely a person to robot or AI? And to what extent do you think it's really becoming personal as in people to people?
I like the chart that the previous speaker talked about, human readiness and AI readiness. The challenge is that AI readiness is much ahead of our human acceptability. And I always say that there is a wow in technology, but no one is really worrying about the how. So I think if we keep the human factor alive in terms of what basic principles of humanity will be continue, what is the role that we will play versus what role technology will play, And ultimately, if we are able to bring us value rather than looking at total outsourcing of our jobs to AI and then have the fear that I will have no work, I think that's one fundamental change or ethos that we need to bring in before we even invest in these technologies. The second challenge is that a lot of peer pressure is there. We had Gen AI, now agentic AI, and now she talked about MCP, model context protocol, and then A2A. Technology will never cease to evolve. The key for us is to look at how will our business outcomes be driven and how will the organization be ready to accept this technology to drive business outcomes. I think a lot of people are just getting pushed into it because their bosses said it, or because the billboards are talking about it, or because valuations are going up the moment you put an AI tagline. But the human culture, transparency, the ability to consume and be able to drive outcomes, what a company wants, that's the fundamental aspect we should first look at.
LaMar, I mean, how does that work inside of let's say, you've had multiple roles and types of organization, enterprise and universities. How does it work, particularly in the enterprise, bridging, their brands and also their relationship with using technology?
I think where there's success, it's early engagement and partnership, so that there's a good definition of the kind of skills and capabilities that the employers need. All right, I've seen we made a really big effort here at Dartmouth actually around career design, and a huge investment. So hats off to investors there to actually make that link more formal and create support that's ongoing, because skills and needs are changing. So I think that's where it works well. You have that kind of partnership and intent.
One of the biggest challenges I think that we're seeing is that there's a lot of technology out there in organizations. I think somewhat of what Charlotte indicated, sure, organizations really struggle to figure out what's the best and the most immediate value. And often organizations are not really willing to even pay the cost of the technology, and wondering what the balance is between should I use the technology or should I use people to employ technology? In the world of learning, how is Ardo addressing this? How do you feel that there's tools that you put in front of organizations that help them really use this AI technology better? What's the value proposition?
That's an interesting one. What we've seen and what some research, I think it was McKinsey, showed over the past few years is most of the companies who are building their own tool around AI for learning are actually failing. I think it was more than 90% of the project of in-house built. So the answer is Ardoise and many other solutions on the market who are actually coming with a strong focus on how AI can be used on learning. What we tend to see is that when companies build something in-house, they do put AI on top of what they have already. And it's very different to try to inject AI in an existing ecosystem rather than rethink everything through the bias and the prism of AI and how can AI bring actually real transformation. Just putting AI on top of what you have is not transformation. It's just trying to work with AI. Taking it through a different angle, and this is where putting external people in and companies whose expertise is exactly that, for learning, for example, is making a difference because we do come with AI native solutions that are built around how can AI actually help us and the company make the most out of to apply it to learning or to another domain. And that's making the big difference.
This question comes in, I'm going to sort of field these as they come in. How does AI foster creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving rather than just automating routine tasks? Have you seen clients really taking this and changing the organization, not just building the organization more efficiently?
I have not. And in fact, I saw some research, and I can't remember where I saw it. It was either Harvard Business Review or MIT, but something like 80% of CEOs think they've involved HR early enough in the conversation around AI to get their information. And, HR can collect what employees need AI for. And HR is almost like 20% of HR people agree with that statement. So there's a real disconnect on when HR should be brought in and when CEOs think they're really getting buy-in from HR. A lot of the companies we're working with now, even global ones, are not really leaning into AI. They're doing much what François just shared, that it's sitting on top of things. Also, way too many employees are putting things in ChatGPT rather than the organization staking a claim, on a specific AI tool. So I think most organizations are not using AI the way it could be used. And I think it's hard for people to think through how they can use AI beyond something like ChatGPT. One thought, I'm kind of going off here, but one way, for example, all of our employee surveys, every time we do one in an organization, not understanding how to grow in the organization is always something that's low ratings. I think we could be using AI for things like that. You could do career mapping and things. So I think you could plug a lot of holes with AI, but to Francois's point, that's not how it should be. The whole organization needs to be rethought through.
Is that true also, LaMar, at the university level? Have they really been thinking this through, or is it just really taking baby steps? I'm not talking about Dartmouth in particular, but just broadly speaking.
Yeah, what I've mostly seen is a lot of piloting, but getting to that operational reality that can be scalable across campus it's tough. I mean, these are environments where just clear ownership around these kinds of topics is not always clear, and you have siloed systems and sometimes data, et cetera. So while there's definitely interest in movement, most of what I see is that still in pilot mode.
One of the things I heard, which I thought was maybe unintended, was the ex-president of Yale at this conference out in California. And he said, Yale will be here long after Anthropic has been forgotten. So, which is a little bit arrogant, I would say, but but there's obviously a long history of Yale. And so is it that do organizations, do the universities really think that this is a passing fad, or do you feel like they just don't have an answer as to how to apply the technologies to make them most useful to each individual student?
Yeah, I don't see that they see it as a passing fad, but the reality of execution is a challenge, right?
Mhm.
The technology is way ahead of capacity to execute in some cases.
Right.
So
I
there's
think that's
definitely-
right. I'm sorry.
No, that's it. There's definitely movement and interest, but it's exactly that.
I think, Rohit, that's what you're referring to, right? There's a lot of technological capacity, but the ability for organizations to figure out how to implement and bring up the skill set of the people to apply these technologies is not there yet.
Absolutely. I think the pace at which AI is evolving versus the pace humans can consume, there is a huge gap which we must realize. But more importantly, in this entire rat race of adopting AI, people are trying to bolt on technology into their own internal inefficiencies, which they've been running for decades. And I would say a true AI native organization will be where they have an AI operating system, where their culture is in place, their technology is built by AI and consumed by humans. The workflows are short, smart, easy to adapt. Their customer experience is par excellence. And of course, everything is available on their mobile at the touch of a button. Till you don't reimagine your business in line with the pace at which AI is building and the capability that you can potentially consume, you will always be a laggard. And your internal inefficiencies will keep adding up, and what you'll end up having is technical debt at the end of a few years of AI skirmishes, of pilots, of POCs without actually doing deployment at scale. So I think those organizations which focus on this aspect first and then get into their AI journey will be the ones that succeed in the end.
Do you see that organizations, that the advertisers that you're working with, right? I'm sure they're a large number. Do you think are they purely looking at TikTok as a source of just eyeballs, or are they also looking at it as a source of educating people, meaning using the platform itself to educate people on technology like AI? Or is it really just, click here, sign up for this course, or sign up for this product, or, educational experience? Or are they trying to use it to be a destination? Just one thought came to mind. Zoom just announced it's starting a Zoom Academy. I mean, who would have thought that Zoom might become a university or some online education play? Is that what you think you think TikTok might be going? Not speaking as a corporate announcement, but is that something that is TikTok the kind of organization you think would be a place where organizations either begin to, like Coursera, create courses or learning experiences?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of both. There is the idea of obviously being the number one platform for discovery, but then also educational content. And there's a wide spectrum in terms of educational content, and what that means is one of the most engaged with content types on the platform. And I think what's interesting in the conversation that we've had so far, I think both François and Rohit spoke to this, is it's almost this infrastructure layer that's missing where, there was a comments about bolting on the technology, and there's a large appetite to add AI to messaging, to programs without necessarily having the infrastructure to support that. And so one of the things that we actually announced at our TikTok World Summit yesterday was the rollout of MCP to allow developers to come and build with AI agents on the platform to create the infrastructure needed, going beyond just the creative layer and scale that we have come to see, but actually building in real infrastructure into the ad platform buying experience so that more small businesses can take advantage of that. I think in terms of even some of the cultural nuance that was spoken of today, globally, I think Milken released last week that Americans have the least amount of optimism on AI. And so if 75% of our payroll is powered by SMB, but only 20% of those are using AI, I think it is a matter of infrastructure. And we are currently building tools to actually help advertisers use AI in a way that is sustainable and streamline some of those workflows that we've been discussing.
But is the workflow for advertising or the workflow as a possible implementation for lack of a better word, a course or a journey or a learning experience? Is it also that you're offering tools where, an organization could create courseware on or journey kind of educational experiences on TikTok?
Yeah, so in terms of the product and course creation on TikTok, that is beyond my scope. But what I will say and what I can say is that we are seeing growth and interest in sort of micro series. And which is an easy kind of program to assign educational content to that I could see evolving into more of a product. But that's not something that I can say that we're actively pursuing. But I do see a use case where partnering with more Coursera's of the world, even Udemy's, in terms of how do we create coursework that's relevant to TikTok's audiences, and do we have products to actually support and enable that, could be something that we solve for.
I won't mention which platform, and it wasn't Coursera, but one of the other big platform partners we had asked us, mentioning the fact that there are a lot of frontline workers, Walmart or that do not have a computer they're walking around with all day. And they have a phone. So we create a TikTok style, literally they use that expression, a TikTok style learning experience in 90 seconds, which will help a frontline worker transition a difficult customer experience or hand off one shift to another. So I don't think it's far off that type of requirement is there. The question is, does it become, a sequence of these, or does Walmart or some other large company like Starbucks or Lowe's, which has workers in the field standing with their phone, is that a learning experience that it will be? And it will be useful, but would it be the way we move things in the future?
Yeah. And I think that goes back to my opening point about the storytelling and being able to do that well and execute on those outcomes, whether it's in, a 15-second clip or a 60-second clip. Can we capture enough attention, tell a powerful enough story to enable those workers to make decisions in real time, where culture is happening and where they're actually spending their time and consuming that type of content?
Martin, you think that the perception at the university level is that this type of, let's call it hyper-personal, but very short snippets of content is not ultimately valuable? And it's maybe, where do you feel that, a university, could you feel in a university environment, would students who ultimately end up in professional careers benefit by that type of education, or do they feel it is really a distraction?
Yeah, I think there's probably mixed feelings. I don't know if there's one thought across campus. There's definitely, I've seen parts of a campus being well ahead of others. Some of the really cutting edge leaning, embedding AI into the pedagogy research work. And then just others who maybe do have a different perspective or just a different ability or competitive pressure to do so. You got, Dartmouth example, our business school, Tuck, is a top, MBA program. They've been doing stuff for quite a bit, using it for role playing and learning, repetitive sort of ways of engaging in negotiation training, for example. And so those are things that are not necessarily the lengthy process. But then you have in the med school and doctor training, role play and all kinds of things. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And I should just plug though, these places optimize on stability long term. These models have been around, while some of the employers are looking for agility and skills development. So I think we have just a combination is going to happen. You have, again, the traditional learning, but alongside that, where it's needed, those upskilling things. And just a plug to Dartmouth, a lot of people don't know, the term AI was originally coined at Dartmouth years ago, and celebrating the anniversary of that. There's just been a long path and a lot of work over the years. So definitely different kinds of experimentation with different modes of pedagogy going on.
Yeah, just for kind of like, how do you link these, these short-term, the short, meaningful, someone just mentioned 20-second learning experiences into a curriculum? How does that get sewn together? Because to me, this is, I always use the example, if you search for how to fix your faucet because it's dripping, Google will tell you at 37 second in this video exactly how to fix it. You don't want to become a plumber necessarily. But obviously, as you learn, someone's more interested in, let's say, those dripping faucets or plumbing, they may be interested in the plumbing career. So how do you take the context that you're developing about a person and turn that into either something they didn't realize they might be wanting to pursue, maybe something you suggest to them, or how do you build more context so that these short things become more long-term educational experience? I don't know if that's a career question.
Yeah, well, that's a great question that opens a lot of boxes, and I could do a very long answer to this one. Maybe just two main things. So there are two things. There is contextualization and personalization in the learning experience itself, which is happening in the sense that depending on your role, depending on your organization, the examples, the scenarios that are built and that you rehearse with AI are specific to you. And then there is personalization in a sense of recommendation, which is more the Netflix area is, oh, you've seen that, now I'm going to propose you that type of content. So that second bit is more around building learning paths and curriculums. With big platform aggregators, you can have these short, longer videos and then build curriculums, and then AI is helping to build curriculums that make sense and that can guide you within going more into depth and into details in plumbing, if that's what you're starting to explore. Just maybe as a quick side note about the length of learning and short videos, we've been shortening a lot learning and experiences altogether because of the lack of engagement. And historically, I think over the past decades, especially in digital, with digital technologies, the big question behind is why were not people engaged? And it comes along with they were passive in the experience, watching content. Whereas when you rehearse with AI and you basically are in a discussion, you're not in a passive posture anymore. You are active and part of the experience. Hence, you can handle longer sessions, if I can say.
So the interesting question, which I guess this is both for LaMar and for, because I actually heard some similar question in London at this education conference where there were a lot of Imperial College and other university professors and people in your tech space there. What do you think a person can do individually if their organization is not investing as much as it should in AI infrastructure or an AI operating system, as was mentioned? If you don't have that kind of support from the top management, what can an organization, what can I do within my own ecosystem, integrate AI into my processes and systems? And this came up because, there's a lot of pushback from big organizations, the cost of making AI available to everyone. Should it universally provide the AI infrastructure, or should, individuals have to go out and do that themselves? I guess the question is, what does an individual do when an organization is not moving fast enough and they believe that they should?
Could take a cut. I mean, again, this is things I've observed where individual, more leading edge faculty members are sometimes getting support from outside resources, engaging with industry and and trying some things, right? And some of those can create proof of some kind of concept or outcomes. I think the more you have that in hand, it's easier to convince the administration for more of a broad, scalable implementation. I think I saw some of that happen at Dartmouth, where now it's a big partnership that's more campus-wide with Anthropic. They announced but there was a lot of other experimentation happening with resources that weren't necessarily coming from central administration.
So essentially, probably you would say the same thing in a large organization. It's fostering as much experimentation and innovation and test pilot projects and see what works. Would you agree on the enterprise side?
Absolutely. First of all, don't feel singled out in a large enterprise with thousands or, hundreds of thousands of people. Your curiosity is what will differentiate you and bring that uniqueness. And currently, there is so much of content. There are so many free sandboxes available. There are so many free tokens available for you to experiment. Of course, you need to conform to the privacy laws of your company and not share company data out in the open, keeping that in mind. But what we've seen very successful is that if there are individuals who have that spark, even if the organization priority or investment may not be there, we still give a chance for people across their working time itself to experiment, to fail fast or to learn fast, to win fast. And once you start building success, saying that I was able to optimize my time by 50% by deploying this AI technology, the magnetic effect it has on the larger organization, even if they're slow and moving at the speed at which you want, can be absolutely, titanic. So my view is keep experimenting, keep learning, keep driving the organization and be the change agent, even if you're singled out. Sooner or later, you will have the investment and the attention and the visibility that you require.
It's interesting because I think that we did a training for one of the largest banks in the world 4 or 5 years ago, and they were very narrowly prescriptive about what features of this specific platform. That it wasn't an AI platform, it was an analytics platform, but it was very narrow and mostly because of cost. It was mostly because of cost. Now I think that it's maybe bottom up institutional change, because people are it's so easy in some level to build something with AI these days that I think a lot is bubbling up from below. An organization should probably be willing to accept that kind of cultural change. And maybe, Catherine, you've got a lot of experience in cultural change in an organization. I guess maybe what advice would you have for leaders in an organization when you have, let's say, for lack of a better word, young people bubbling up with hundreds of ideas, and you're watching this, there's bubbles happening, right in front of you. How do you manage that kind of rapid change when AI is everywhere?
Yeah. Well, that refers back to what I was saying earlier. HR has to be involved. How could a leader at the top of an organization possibly know what it is that employees down below need every day? What would make them more efficient unless they've engaged with HR to go and get that information for them? So one piece of advice is you need to be getting that information much earlier on before you even start looking at AI tools or building things. There's a lot of change management components of adding AI that are missing. Change, if you want your entire organization to make a culture shift, there has to be change management principles in place, a lot more communication, a lot more empowering managers to facilitate the change and so on. I also want to mention organizations already don't invest enough in training. A great example is we all know people leave their manager, not their job, right? We've been talking about that forever, and yet employers continue to fail in giving their managers enough training. And when the economy's hurting, often training is one of the nice to haves that gets dropped off. So for us to, kind of sit here and pontificate on how AI is going to impact learning, I think learning is one of the places we have a lot longer to go, because organizations already do not understand the value of learning. So, but to answer your question, it's the same thing I'm always talking about. Leaders need to understand the needs of their employees and act on them. And, we go into broken cultures when that's not happening. I had one other thing to say. I wanted to circle back to kind of this just-in-time learning that you were talking about earlier. That phrase has been around for quite a while. And I know 15 years ago when QR codes were invented, everybody was talking about like, now you could stick a QR code on a machine, on the copy machine, for example, or at a manufacturing plant, and someone could then go straight to learning on how to use that machine. So we're just talking about a sped up version if it's a TikTok style kind of thing. And with Gen Z taking over the workforce, organizations are going to need to feed learning to them in a way that works for them and in the way that they've grown up learning, which is through TikTok style videos. So I think
or they're going to lose them, because if somebody because anyone says, or you can vibe code, or you can create a whole bunch of tools today. And if an organization is not willing to, word I was going to use is monetize, but I meant, take advantage of. I don't mean monetize financially necessarily, but take advantage of the smarts of the people inside the organization, the hunger, and clearly right now the leaning forwardness, if that's a phrase, of how do you employ these new tools, then they will lose them to other organizations that are more forward thinking. One last question on this point, François, was really for you. At the same point is that, there's obviously a diverse cultural issue here, right? Some organizations look at speaking up as offensive, and others will look at it as challenging authority. And how does that, and how do you in a digital environment recognize the difference? Or how do you apply the, like a better word, the algorithms or the rules that enable it to work well in a different cultural setting?
Yeah, that's indeed a very important point to be able to scale what's done with AI, especially for learning. That's basically not getting into specific technical details, but what companies put within the database and the information and the data that is used by AI to create the learning experiences and to then deploy the learning experiences, this is where we embed these cultural differences. And this is where we would say, we recognize that you are coming from that country, working in that department. So here is the set of rules that we use for you. If you are coming from a different region, a different country, different department, we have a different set of rules for you. The architecture of the course is not changing. The scenario that you would rehearse is not changing, but what's embedded in it is depending on who you are and where you come from within the organization or from a geographic perspective. This is where we're making a difference.
So the tools need to be context engineered, or provide context engineering tools for the enterprise or the university to make it most relevant to them.
Yeah, basically
Is that a fair statement?
you put that at root level, and then it cascades in all the experiences that you create, basically.
Yeah, and I think that one of the last things I noticed those against this conference, where there was someone talking about physics education and how, these large language models just do not work in a university setting for physics education unless they are highly organized around the content of physics. Not just a generic model, but one that a RAG or an inference model that works specifically for those students. Otherwise, it makes no sense. It looks trivial. It looks superficial. And so the personalization and the contextualization is quite relevant and quite essential to the success of any platform or any tool. I don't know if anyone wanted to add anything to this. I want to see if there's another question. Is there anything that anyone else wanted to add? I mean, we covered a lot in a pretty short period of time.
Well, maybe on a super quick note, and maybe from one of the last point that Catherine was developing, I think especially for learning, organizations have to acknowledge that learning is not coming from the top. We've known that for a long time. It's not happening in a classroom. It's coming from everyone within the organization. And AI, rightly used, is actually giving the tools to capture all these learning experiences and make sure that everyone can actually share and learn within the same way.
And bubbling up very fast.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate everyone's contributions and comments today, and we'll hopefully see you at the next event. And thank you for everything. We'll move on to the next panel now.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.